So what are the major roles in osteopathy for the skin? What's skin for? Well, it's for defense. Everyone's heard that one. It's for sensation, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And it's for organization. And the organization has several roles. But let's just talk a little bit about sensation and organization. So let's start off with this kind of very general look at the skin. Okay, so up here we have our stratum corneum. And what's so important about the stratum corneum? For us, there's two key things that are occurring here. One is you can see that this tissue, this cell type, is stratified keratinized squamous epithelium. So what's important about stratified squamous keratinized epithelium? What's important for that is that those cells there are designed to be sloughed off, right? So they're designed to be sloughed off as part of the system that protects us from wear and tear. So every time you move your clothes and every time a person brushes against something, every time they're rubbed, some of these cells are sloughed off. And when they're sloughed off or sloughed off and left lying there, they provide some nutrition for your flora. We're going to talk more about that because the flora is part of your system of defense. And secondly, what's important to recognize here is that in this stratum corneum is a change in pH. And changes in pH are very significant for us. And why they're so significant is in terms of phylogeny, that is our organization and change as organisms that became gradually more and more complex starting 1 billion years ago, starting off with prokaryotes and ended up with next eukaryotes, and then complex multicellular organisms, and then, invertebrates and vertebrates, this whole process. One of the earliest organizing principles was pH. Our whole body is tied very sensitively to changes in pH. Right? So there's a trend about 10 or 15 years ago where everyone was talking about acid-base balance in food and how important you eat alkaline food, and alkaline food is really important because it reduces acidosis, and acidosis is really bad, blah, 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 right? And yes, food is very, very important. There's no doubt about it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And the quality of the food, and the nutritional content of the food, super important. But what those people, when they were talking about acid-base balance, were forgetting is that the key organ for maintaining acid-base balance is your lungs. And then it's the kidneys. So guess what? You look at someone's skin, you get an idea for the health of their lungs and their kidneys. Why? The skin reflects everything that's going on in those deeper layers related to the green gooey stuff, the mesodermic tissues. And so when you look at someone's skin, you get an idea for the quality and effectiveness of the performance of organs like lung and kidney and heart, right? So like when you see changes, vascular changes at a certain level, right? For example, in the legs, when you have varicosities, that tells us a lot about how that heart is doing. Not that it tells you exactly what's going on with the heart, but you get an idea for a sense of resistance that heart has to push through and then pull fluid back up from. Likewise, not to be forgotten, is the liver. The performance of the liver, the way it processes all of what we eat post-digestion as part of the process of metabolism, there's over 1,400 enzymatic reactions in the liver. If there's a trend where that liver is not working well, you're going to see that as changes in color of skin, particularly yellow. Now, that doesn't mean that every bit of yellow discoloration in the skin is important, but like, for example, a darkening, right, can be significant, or a yellowing can be significant as part of a pattern. Any one individual finding, for us, may or may not have significance. But how you link those things up together into pattern, that's the key. And so if you think about pattern, if you think about those things we're looking at, let's just go back previous. Here, the other question we ask ourselves all the time all the time is this change local, regional, or systemic? Right? So a change of redness in one patch here in my skin may or may not be significant. It could be truly local, like an actual localized injury. It could be local to, say, a spinal segment, right? But if it shows up in a couple areas along that segment in terms of a dermatonal change, now we're thinking more of a regional change. And if you see those changes of redness all over the place, what does that mean? It's systemic, right? So now we've got to think back to what that might mean for us osteopathically. So how are we going to address something that's made a systemic change in the skin? We're going to think back to the connective tissue. We examine the connective tissue, right? And that could be something as simple as pinching the skin folds to detect hydration, right? Or the quality of induction of movement across the skin. So those things, of course, are really important. But what they tell us also is that if there's a change in the skin and a change in the connective tissue, we go one more level backwards. What's going on at those organs that supply the connective tissue? Again, liver, right? And what controls the connective tissue? I mean, the pH of the connective tissue, for example. Lung, kidney. And what's applying circulatory drive to the connective tissues? Heart. And what's storing the blood? The venous system. So all of that is really, really important for us to understand. When you look at and touch the skin, you're thinking about that movement of different dimensions. Very local, more regional, more global. All right. And again, we're always trying to triangulate information. Is there an odor attached to this? Is there a change in the movement? Is there a change in affect? Is there a change in behavior? Do the things that we look at and the assumptions we make from those changes in appearance, do they triangulate positively or negatively with movement in the body? Right? These are things that we really, really have to think about. So again, one of the important roles of skin is defense. So it's a barrier that prevents, things from the outside getting in. And it also has a pH gradient. So it's more acidic on the outside and more basic on the inside, which means on the outside, a certain flora can grow there, but they can't grow on the inside. And they can't grow because the pH on the inside of the skin is deleterious to their health, even though they can survive on the outside of the skin. But you might say, well, if it's on the outside of the skin, if it's there long enough and there's enough of them, can't they somehow, get past the skin or overpower the skin? If there's a break, yes, they can. But what's more important is they have our friends who are fighting against them. That's called our flora. And our flora feeds off the stuff that's on top of our skin. Oil from sebaceous glands, the keratinized cells that are sloughed off, moisture that's on the skin. So that's our flora. So guess what's really important to do to that stuff? Not wash it off. I mean, okay, use a little water. It makes them even happy. But those heavy-duty soaps we love using in our culture, long-term, are influencing our flora in a negative way. And remember, our flora is what's combating those other bacteria that are not to our advantage. They're trying to hurt us. Well, they're not trying to hurt us. They're trying to survive. But their survival might mean that they hurt us. Well, it's really important. And that's all just that skin. Okay. So the other thing that's important is sensation. So the idea of where sensory receptors are located. This has twofold implications for us. First one is, if we notice where these neuroreceptors are, like the Pacinian corpuscle, right, or Meissner corpuscle, well, this layer here, although we're talking about it related to skin, it's connective tissue. And how do I know it's connective tissue? Because the lamina basalis, right, our basement membrane, it's indicated here called stratum basale. Remember, that's bringing blood flow up to feed the skin. There's no blood flow up here. It only goes this far, right? So remember that two-component glue that makes up the lamina basalis, one component of that glue holds the connective tissue to the skin. The other component of that glue holds the skin to the connective tissue. And the reward for that system is food in the form of circulation. So look at this. We have our sensory receptors in the connective tissue. So what does that mean for us? Well, they're located in the connective tissue in this zone because they're telling the connective tissue what's happening to the skin. So if something's pushing against the connective tissue at a certain level, these guys detect it. And if that pressure or that change is deleterious or noxious, they respond. That's called nociception. What's really important is if this system has changes, if that connective tissue is changing, it changes the performance and the activity of the nervous system that's at that level. In other words, a person with poor health doesn't feel the same as a person in good health. They do not have the same capacity for accurate sensation. Likewise, so that's their experience of palpation and sensation. Likewise, they do not necessarily interpret change or sensation coming from the external world into our internal world as efficiently or as accurately. Right? So the system of defense in those individuals is poorer. It's like when I talk to someone and they say to me, you know, my mother, she's always bumping herself now. It's really funny. And I think, okay, well, what could cause that? So changes in the nervous system, 100%. What else is going on there in that person? Their experience of being able to interpret the stimuli from the external world is no longer as effective. There's an error in accuracy. And I know so much about what's going on in that person's system based on that. And where do you think I started looking? I started looking at what's going on in the nervous system, of course, as we talked about in functional neurology. And I think about all those organs that supply nutrition for the skin. Again, circulatory system, heart, lung, liver, kidney. They're all involved. All right, so there's a little discussion about changes in pH at the level of the skin. And I think one other thing that's really important to mention here about skin, aside from conductance and sensation, all those things, is your skin and your fat are places your body likes to store stuff that's noxious, that it doesn't want. So like if you ingest something that is truly poor for your health, your body wisely says, well, we got to get rid of it. Can't let it just float around the nervous system, hitting a nerve, bang, there goes the nerve. So where are we going to put it? Well, we put it like we humans do. Where do you put junk? Where do you guys put junk when you don't want it? But you don't want to throw it out. You can't. But you want to get rid of it. Where do you put it?
In the garage.
You put it in the damn garage. There's the garage. Right? Now, I like to put a fairly decent car in my garage. That's the type of guy I am. That's how I roll. Right? But some people, what do they like put in the garage? Junk. That's the junk in the trunk. This is where this comes from. Not that expression, this conceptually is where this comes from. In other words, your system says, oh man, that little hunk of urea, that is bad. Where are we going to put it? Well, let's not stick it in the brain because that's the end of a nerve cell. So let's stick it somewhere else. Well, it's floating around in the circulatory system. It's part of the connective tissue. Hot damn. Let's stick it into someone who likes being kicked in the balls with chemicals. And who is that? The adipocytes. So what happens is when you have something that's deleterious in your system, your body takes it and it floats around in the circulatory system until it finds access to an adipocyte or an area where you have adipocytes. And those areas are much less, they have much less activity than the rest of the system. And so it takes it, it throws it in there, right, into cells that respond to chemicals called adipocytes, which are fat cells. They're storage cells. It's all in the name. Those are storage cells. They store stuff. And the stuff they store is typically chemical, mostly result of metabolism, blood sugar, stuff like that. But they can store stuff. That's the role. And so junk that shouldn't be in the system ends up in the fat cells. And look where we have so many of these little fat cells, called the subcutaneous fat or adipose tissue right here. So what happens? What happens is stuff builds up in the fat, but also just under the skin. And if you have enough of that stuff, what do you get? You get that type of thing, right? Which is a little blotch. You see a little bump? Those little bumps just in the eye. Typically, if they're a little bit darker or a little bit yellowish, it's related to changes in cholesterol metabolism in that whole system, right? So if you see that, and you see that, which is a yellowing of the sclera, you get a sense for something that's wrong in that person's biliary system, their liver. And the thing we have to remember too is that we cannot forget that people of color have the same process. So you have to be a little more attentive in how you examine them. So like, everyone's sclera should be white. Now, if a person is very dark-skinned, you might miss the color change involved in something like that, right? Those bumps. But the change in the skin, the texture, and the smoothness will still be the same type of change. Just different coloration, different pigmentation. So like a change in, so say someone is dark-skinned, right? Those changes like the one I'm indicating right here, it's in your notes, those are really important. You might not be able to see it in the video, but you can definitely see it in the notes. And it's important to just take a quick look at that and realize that everything applies the same, except now we're talking about a little more subtle changes, right? So we're talking about, someone who has very dark skin, is this area darker than the rest? Is it lighter than the rest, right? And of course, anytime you see something that's reddish, right? That's highly indicative of a change that you should be mindful of. Now again, if a person is very dark-skinned, you might not be able to see the color change, but as a red spot, but you can certainly see it as like a darkening in that person. And for sure, the changes in texture will be different from this area in a dark-skinned person versus this area. And the thing I want everyone to remember is that how this works is not by looking at it one day and thinking about it. This becomes part of your practice of touch and examination, right? And then you have to do it a million times. It's the only way this works. It's a volume of referential experience. That means you have to have experience that you can refer to, right? So this isn't about the osteopathy you learn in a book. This is about the osteopathy that you learn from a teacher who teaches you, and then your work done clinically every day. Thank you for your time, everyone.